Contract cheating is emerging as this new problem, and before we go into the details of what it is, we have to acknowledge that we're always already involved in an arms race with our students. They figure out a new way to cheat, we figure out a new way to catch them, so they figure out a new way to cheat. And I think we do need to concentrate on stopping this arms race, but for the time being, we're facing a new front in this arms race. It is a new form of plagiarism, and we're kind of now used to dealing with cut and paste plagiarism. But with Turnitin coming along, we've now got this new problem, which is contract cheating. And the way I define contract cheating, it's when a student procures a third party, and this bit's important, who knows about and benefits from the transaction, to do their assessable or non-assessable work for them. And then they go and submit that to an educational institution as if it's their own work. And in terms of size order, by far and away the biggest is family and friends and students and former students. That's where most people are getting this work done for them. And it reminds us that contract cheating doesn't mean that money is changing hands. It can just be mutual favours or mutual benefit. The second biggest part of the problem or the industry are academic custom writing sites, and I'll come back and talk about those in a few moments. The third largest is legitimate learning sites. These are perfectly legitimate sites, micro-tutoring sites, note-sharing sites, file-sharing sites, but they are being used to procure and supply contract cheating work. The fourth segment are legitimate non-learning sites. Again, perfectly legitimate sites. Places like eBay, Airtasker, Rent-A-Coder, perfectly legitimate sites, but contract cheating is being procured and supplied through them. The next biggest are exam proxies. That's getting someone else to sit your exam for you, either in person or virtually for online exams. And finally, the smallest section of the problem are these ready-made essay sites or ready-written essay sites. They used to be quite big, but they're dying out now because Turnitin obviously means that students can't submit the same pre-written essay more than once. So I said I'd come back and talk about the academic custom writing sites, and from my investigation there are really two types of main site out there. Now the first is what I call the two-sided market. When I talk about this one, you need to have a think about it being a bit like eBay. You've got a bunch of people who've got something that they want to sell and a bunch of people who've got something that they want to buy. The other type of site are these online writing sites. And when I talk about these, it's a bit more like Uber. So people place an order and whoever is available and able to take that order is them and bids for it quickly enough is the one that gets the order. And I've been able to find the sorts of sites that we're used to seeing, and I call these client sites. And one of the things that I really noticed about the sites I was looking at is a lot of them looked very similar to each other. And I thought they had to have something in common. So I did a little bit more forensic IT work and I discovered some more sites. Now I call these ones writer sites. They're clearly associated with the contract cheating industry, but these ones are definitely not facing the student clients. They're facing the writers, and there are promising things like good income, flexible working hours, being able to work from home, those kinds of things. And it made me realise that what we're used to seeing as these contract cheating websites were actually just the shop window, and the main engine room sitting behind them was the writer sites. But the real piece of the puzzle was when we found what we call the master sites. And these are places where you or I could go and spend about $650 and pay someone else to build these online sites for us. The really interesting things about these sites was they offered us a demo, a login that allowed us to go and look at what these sites will be like when they're built for us. And from that we were able to reverse engineer the business processes that are going on in these sites. I won't go into any detail about that, but the really interesting thing we learned from this was how sophisticated the business models are, which suggests to us that this is servicing a big market. When academics hear about this, they often feel really outraged and angry, and the instinctive response we have is we want to do something about it. So what I want to turn to now is to give us some ideas about what we should be doing and perhaps what we shouldn't be doing. So I'm going to start with some of the things we should not and cannot do. And I think the first thing to be aware of is we cannot prevent it entirely. The other thing we shouldn't do and we cannot do is ignore it and hope it will go away. That is not going to happen, and we need to decide to take action. But thinking about this from a teacher's point of view, there's really two things we need to be focusing on. On the one hand, deterrence, and on the other hand, detection. And detection really, to my mind, is a really important part of deterrence. If we're not picking it up, it doesn't stand as a deterrent to students. But I think the things we really should be focusing on is educating our students about this and communicating with them about this and equipping them with the skills and the acumen to be able to resist the temptation to do this. So this is an area where there really hasn't been a lot of research done yet, but some really interesting research is starting to emerge, and I'm really proud to be a part of a research team that's looking into this across a range of universities in Australia and the UK. We've conducted two big surveys, one where we've got over 14,000 responses from students, and another one where over 1,000 staff have responded to our survey. I'm going to share some of the results of that research with you now. But the really headline finding was that about 6% of our respondents said that they had engaged in these cheating behaviours at least once in their student career. So that's a really interesting finding in the sense that it's about in line with what previous research is telling us about cheating behaviours, but still it's quite a big number. If we think about a class with 200 students in it, 12 of them have engaged in this behaviour. That feels like quite a lot. So some of the headlines that we've got from our responses is that 37% of our respondents who acknowledged that they'd done one of these cheating behaviours were saying that they had obtained an assignment from somebody else to submit as their own. What's really interesting is only about 2/3 of them went on to actually submit that work. But really what's striking about this is that the highest proportion of the cheating behaviours is still in exam cheating. So a lot of people who think that invigilated or proctored exams are a really good solution to this problem have got to acknowledge that it's still where most of the cheating behaviour is going on. Another thing to note about the results is just how many students are calling on family and friends and students and former students to do this work for them. The number that are going to a professional service is relatively low, and the proportion of times where money is changing hands is also relatively low. So when we think about contract cheating, we need to make sure we're thinking beyond just instances where money is changing hands, because actually the bulk of contract cheating is happening when it's mutual favours, family and friends, and students and former students. To better understand what this data was telling us, we started by looking at the students whose language was other than English. We wanted to see if that was somehow related to their attitudes to the rightness and wrongness of certain cheating behaviours. So we asked all students how strongly they agreed or disagreed with the rightness and wrongness of a range of cheating behaviours. What was interesting is the cheating group were always less likely to agree that these behaviours were wrong than the non-cheating group. And that stands to reason, is that students who are cheating are wanting to rationalise this behaviour. But when we split out the cheating group into the languages other than English and the languages being English, there was no statistically significant difference. So what this tells us is that students whose first language is other than English know that these behaviours are wrong, but they are doing this even still. We hope this is debunking one of the key myths that we often hear, that in some cultures or some countries, certain behaviours are not considered wrong. There's no evidence in our data to support that. We asked the students in the survey about their perceptions of the teaching and learning environment, and there was one really striking thing about which all of the students agreed. They agreed that we're spending a lot of time talking to them about the academic integrity policies. We're talking to them about cut and paste plagiarism, about referencing, about paraphrasing. But they also agreed that we're not talking about contract cheating. And this is where I think we've got a problem. And this is where I now want to turn my attention to focus on the sorts of conversations we need to be having with each other and with our students. Now at this point it's really helpful to bring in the other survey that we conducted of over 1,000 academic staff in universities in Australia. We asked them a range of things, but one of the things that we really focused on is how prevalent they thought the problem was. And if we compare that to the students' perceptions, it's really interesting. On this graph you can see that the staff got it about right. Their estimate of around about 10% of students correlates with the findings we got from the 14,000 students that we surveyed. And then when we asked the students the same question, the non-cheating group also were pretty on the money. They got it about right. Their understanding or their perception of the prevalence was quite aligned with the academic staff perceptions. But the cheating group, they were significantly different. In other words, our cheating students think this is much more common than it actually is. And again, this is about students who are cheating, explaining or rationalising that behaviour to themselves and perhaps to others, that if everybody is doing this, then it's okay for me to do it. Another really interesting finding from our two surveys is when we asked the staff and the students how concerned they are about the problem of contract cheating. When we ask the staff, it's really heartwarming to see that the vast majority of them are moderately to extremely concerned about this problem. When we ask the students, it's really strikingly different. The response from the students who admitted to cheating is almost the exact opposite. It forms a kind of cross graph where they're actually not very concerned about it. But when we overlay the non-cheating students onto this graph, that's when it's really shocking. Their level of concern overlays almost exactly with the level of concern of the cheating students. The students who aren't cheating don't see this as a significant problem. If we can get those students to care about this problem, we've got an enormous resource on our hands. So now what I want to turn to consider are the conversations that we need to have with our students. And the first one is to explain the problem of contagion. One of the reasons it's contagious is because the very business model of these academic custom writing sites depends on return business from students and word of mouth advertising. A result of this is students are going to know a lot more about this than we do. And this is where we can really harness our non-cheating students. For every one student who thinks, yeah, that's a good idea, there'll be 9 who'll think, I'd never do that in a million years. If we can get those students to care and to do something about reporting the students who are using these services, then we've got a huge number of students that can be useful to us in our detection endeavours. But probably the most important conversation we need to have with students is about risk. It's useful to divide this into two halves. On the one hand, the private risk, and on the other hand, the public risk. So let's start with the public risk. Every student we graduate from educational institution is going to put the public at risk if they haven't properly demonstrated their learning to us. It's easy to think about nursing students and engineering students. But what about financial advisors? What about human resource management, primary school teachers, special education teachers? Everybody we graduate needs to be properly qualified so that we're not putting the public at risk. But private risk, this is what will really hit home to the students. First of all, the risk of getting caught. The penalties for this are, or ought to be, severe. They're also putting themselves at risk of blackmail, probably for the rest of their lives. A lot of educational institutions have reported writers ringing them up and saying, I did this work for the student, they haven't paid their bill. Here is their ID number, here is the work that they did. There's also the risk of the data security of these websites. Are they really storing the work that they've done for them and the information about themselves, the students' clients, as securely as they claim to be? But the biggest private risk is not doing the learning. It's why they're coming to the educational institution, and it's the most important thing they should be getting from it. One of the things we need to think about when we're thinking about the conversations we have with students is we need to keep having the conversation about cut and paste plagiarism, referencing, paraphrasing and writing skills, absolutely. But that shouldn't be the be-all and the end of the conversations that we have about academic integrity. We need to talk about academic integrity in a broader context. We need to link it through to other types of integrity, personal integrity, and ultimately through to professional integrity. And we need to talk about it in terms of good ethics and good morals in everything that we do. Ultimately, the conversation we need to have with our students is that this matters. It's not a victimless crime. Not all students are doing it. And it's not okay, and it's not harmless. So overall, we need to talk about this more. We need to talk about it with each other, as teachers, as educators, as people who are passionate about students. But we also need to talk to our students about it. They need to know that we know, and they need to know that we care. So ultimately, my call to you all is to go out and talk about it, have conversations about it, and talk as an institution about what you need to be doing to prepare yourselves to address this in terms of better detection and better deterrence so that we can achieve better outcomes for all of our students. So it remains important that we work with Turnitin. Obviously, we're really used to using Turnitin's originality reports, and they're still going to be important in the work that we need to do. But Turnitin are really committed to helping us with new tools that can help us address these new contract cheating problems. But they need our expertise. They need our understanding of how our educational institutions work. They also need us to be making sure that our policies and procedures are fit for purpose and are going to work well. So we need to be making sure that our policies, our penalties, and our procedures are well attuned to this new problem that we're having to address. Turnitin are committed to helping us with this, but they need to work in partnership with us, and we need to work in partnership with them.